We all are the product of our experiences and decisions. Every decision influences our present and shapes the paths to our future. We all are under constant change as individuals and as a society. The decisions we make in certain situations and how we deal with external influences can have long-lasting consequences and be way more influential than we might have thought at that point in time. Some of our decisions follow us for a lifetime. On February 1st, 1933, a baby girl was born and given the name Maria Rosalia Auguste Nitribitt, later called by the name Rosemarie. Her living conditions, decisions, and the subsequent consequences formed by them led to her untimely death by a murderer at age 24 on October 29, 1957. Her decisions and the path they took her down resulted in one of the biggest and most prestigious unsolved murder cases in post-war West Germany. I will try to prove how they led down to a scandal about sloppy work, corruption, cover-ups, and deception. A cover-up that even until this very day is propagated by public service broadcasters and private broadcasting stations, whether it is due to lack of understanding, lack of research, being unreflective, or, in the worst case, actually on purpose. Whatever the reason, it still continues even at the time this very video gets uploaded. Rosemarie was a bastard child, born from an underage mother who herself was a convicted criminal and deemed a retard by authorities as they tended to describe mentally challenged people. Rosemarie never knew her father. He was a construction worker from Düsseldorf who had a one-night stand with her mother and refused to take any responsibility for the child. No visits, no payments, nothing. She was no single child though. Rosemarie had two half-sisters, both also fathered by different men who had their way with a minor. One of her half-sisters, Irmgard, in her late life would be sent on a real odyssey due to the events surrounding Rosemarie. Rosemarie lived with her mother and sisters in poverty in the town of Ratingen for the first 3 years of her life. In 1936, Child Protective Services from Düsseldorf took her away and put her into a foster home in the town of Eschweiler. At age 5 in 1938, she was given to a foster family in a small place called Niedermendig. Her foster parents, Nikolaus and Anna Maria Elsen, were middle-class working people, and they were able to care for young Rosemarie a lot better than her mother or the foster home could. That was until the beginning of World War II, however, which resulted in many people becoming impoverished. The Elsens lost their income and assets, but Rosemarie herself did not let this take her zest for life away. She continued as a lively, happy, and cheerful young girl. All signs pointed to a good future for her, despite the poverty. But this changed in only one single day. Rosemarie's fate was shaped into a gruesome, tragic, and inhumane future. At age 11, Rosemarie got raped by an 18-year-old neighboring boy. The most disgusting part in this, however, is that the rape went unpunished. The event was swept under the rug. The rape of an 11-year-old child was just hushed up. This was most likely what led her to go to the bed, leading to her untimely demise. At this point, I want to clear up something. The war-ridden people had a very clear idea of their perception of morality. We all know how the Nazis in the Third Reich viewed people with mental handicaps, homosexuals, and other people not fitting the Aryan image. Being a bastard child alone was disgraceful. Being the daughter of a mentally challenged criminal also meant that both these properties were deemed genetically inheritable, and people would reference this belief a lot. What happened to this little girl was not only hushed up, but people started to shift the blame onto the little girl. She was the spawn of a retarded criminal who as a minor already had 3 kids from 3 men. Who knows if she didn't seduce the boy? After all, like mother, like daughter. These kinds of arguments were probably commonly discussed amongst the villagers. And when adults talk like this behind closed doors, whispering, children are way crueler and more relentless. They might have thrown these accusations her way without any restraint. Without even her foster parents to turn to, without any justice getting served in any way, the unavoidable happened. Rosemarie went astray. 1946, 2 years after the rape, possibly under constant abuse, getting called a slut and a shame to the community on a daily basis, she made friends with 2 prostitutes, resulting in her entering the red light milieu. If everyone was going to call her a slut anyway, she might as well become one. Rosemarie's first customers had been soldiers of the occupying armies of France and the US. She stayed away from home for nights on end accompanying the soldiers, and at age 13 she allegedly had her first abortion. Her character changed gradually, and soon enough, 1 year later on August 22, 1947, her foster parents called Child Protective Services for advice. CPS reports stated that Rosemarie was depraved and morally endangered. The reports state, and I cite this now, quote, "Third of 3 bastard children of a retarded mother," unquote, who was put into foster care because of her, quote, "hereditary disposition from her mother and her acquaintanceship with the soldiers of the occupying armies that led to her completely losing her morals," unquote. The rest of Rosemarie's life, up to 5 years prior to her death, can be generally reconstructed by the CPS reports too. The next paragraphs are cited from these reports, although of course translated into English. On March 31st, 1950, Rosemarie N. was returned to her foster parents in Niedermendig and took a job at Café Wenke in the city of Andernach. Reports of that time state that Rosemarie liked to dress very flashy and wore lots of fashion jewelry. On February 2nd, 1951, she got apprehended by police at Frankfurt main station after midnight and handed over to local health authorities. On May 17, 1951, she got to local health authorities from a restaurant called Reichshof. August 9, 1951, she got handed from police to local health authorities yet again after having served a 3-week sentence for vagrancy. April 6, 1952, police forces took her from a flat in Bürgerstraße 13 from a person called Steinmetz and again handed her over to the health authorities. After this, she was sent to the city of Trier to stay at a foster home called Maria Trost. In 1952, Rosemarie N. told foster care authorities that she was now under the care of a rich friend who was doing businesses between France, Germany, and Switzerland all the time. This man was a Swiss male, name is censored, 39 years of age. In 1956, the foster care authorities were tipped off by tenants of the house situated in Stiftstraße, the house in which Rosemarie now owned a condominium and where she was going about her prostitution business. They told authorities about Rosemarie living a severely seedy life, Miss, name censored, of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung newspaper. What is not stated in these reports is that in April 1952, just when Rosemarie stated that she was under care of this rich Swiss man, no foster home, children's home, or any kind of institution already wanted to take her in. Her tendency to run away and her scandalous character were reason enough to turn her away, but they officially couldn't, without a good reason, however. That rich man caring for her as an excuse to let Rosemarie leave the foster program was a really lucky coincidence. Maybe a bit too lucky for my liking. Since 1952, Rosemarie officially worked at a working center in Brauweiler. Today, this town is called Pulheim, where she glued paper bags together and worked on a loom. Additionally, Rosemarie earned some money on the side in the area around the main station. She calls herself Rebecca, and Rebecca has a goal. A higher goal. Rosemarie takes lessons in English, French, and undergoes a mannequin training program, learning about etiquette, manners, and how to act around high society. Her targets are no longer soldiers or common people. Rosemarie wants to get the big players, the high and mighty. Her earnings as a prostitute and her economical, even stingy handling of money led to her being able to afford nice things. At first, she was known as Captain Lady, due to her car having been a black Opel Kapitän to go about her work. Soon, however, she was able to afford a way better lifestyle and leave the area around the main station. Just like she wanted, she changed her Opel for a brand new black Mercedes-Benz 190 SL sports coupe with red leather seats, a car not even the most successful doctors could afford. Rosemarie got famous for that car alone. At Eschenheimer Turm in Frankfurt, at Stiftstraße 36 to be more precise, she moved into a brand new and for that time very luxurious condominium. 4th floor, left, apartment 41. a 2-bedroom flat with 70 square meters and one of the very few at all to already have been fitted with an underfloor heating. Rosemarie has done it. She was able to escape poverty and offered her services to the West German high society. Even though she occasionally served students, even for free if they actually matched her taste in men, the money she charged for her services was way above what most middle-class men had on their paycheck, and it was utopic for anyone below. There were talks about 500 to 600 and even 1,000 German marks to be paid for her company. Taking inflation and the change of currency into perspective, we are talking about 1,250 to 2,500 euros as of today. A price really no one outside Rosemarie's client milieu could have afforded. Still, behind closed doors, people admired her. Young men went after her, trying to catch as many glimpses of the beautiful woman as possible, fantasizing about spending time with her. Girls wanted to be just as glamorous and confident as the Nitribitt, as people called her even until today. But in the end, she still was nothing but a prostitute, and behind her glamorous facade, she actually was a cold, calculated person. Not even above extorting money from her johns by faking pregnancies. A woman with the goal to find a suitable, wealthy man to act as her financial safe haven. She did all she had to do in order to reach this, and on the side, she seemingly was on a personal revenge spree against men. To the people, Rosemarie was a disgrace to society. Even if people admired her behind closed doors, this woman was a walking, talking scandal to the prudish West German culture. A scandal that would still make the news long after her death. On November 1957, residents of Stiftstraße 36 called the police. Rosemarie's mate, who she had a harsh ongoing argument with for some time, was wondering about milk and buns piling up in front of her employer's door. Since Rosemarie would have paused any orders before leaving for days on end, it was a very uncommon sight, especially since Rosemarie herself has not been seen for a few days either. When police entered the flat by force, they found Rosemarie's body in front of her sofa. One leg rested on the cushions, the other one was under this piece of furniture. Under her head lay the terry towel. This towel was believed to have been placed deliberately under Rosemarie's head, interpreted as an act of love, kindness, or care. However, I will show you now the original crime scene photograph. Beware, even though this photograph will be censored by me, viewer discretion is advised. Take a look and tell me, does this look like a deliberately placed towel for the purpose of cushioning Rosemarie's head or soaking up blood? To me, it looks more like it ended up in this place by pure coincidence during the fight between Rosemarie and her killer. At her side, police found an ashtray made from glass and some bits of broken glass as well as a bloodied up telephone handset. It would make sense that the glass shards belonged to the ashtray that was most likely used to strike Rosemarie in the head. Her dog Joe was weak and starving, but alive still. The flat's heating units had been turned up and the smell of desecration was hovering in the air like a thick veil. Rosemarie had seemingly been hit with the glass ashtray first and then strangled to death. Blood splatters on the sofa and its cushions, the positioning of the body, and the ashtray led to the belief of a fight having taken place before the killing. And with this, the hunt for the killer began. Officially, at least. First, I will investigate the main suspect in this case. The man that had been prosecuted, accused, and ultimately acquitted of the murder of Rosemarie due to supposed ascertainment errors. Even though these errors and unobscured sloppy work had occurred, there was a lot more going on behind the scenes. But I don't want to pre-record too much now. Rosemarie was a loner, a freeloading prostitute without a pimp and thus offside the milieu and kind of without any protection. She still had not to worry about the last point mentioned, because she befriended a man from who she benefited just as much as he did from her. This is the same man who got accused and acquitted of her killing, by the way. His name was Heinz Pohlmann. Pohlmann was a sales agent for the company Ritter, a petty criminal, scammer, and con man who permanently lived beyond his means and tried to pay his debts with his criminal activities. His height of close to 6 foot and 7 inches and his big physique made him a pretty intimidating person. The perfect company for a small, slender Rosemarie to bring along if she had a bad feeling about a customer. And Pullman's benefit? Well, he got left alone by police forces for the most part at least. Rosemarie served as his alibi for a whole different thing, however. You see, Pullman was one of the then called 175ers. He was a homosexual. To better understand how beneficial the companionship between Rosemarie and Heinz was for him, we absolutely need to take a look into paragraph 175 before we go any further in the case. The term 175er is a direct reference to paragraph 175 in the German Criminal Code at that specific time, which labeled homosexuality as a punishable offense. Paragraph 175 existed from January 1st, 1872, when the then Criminal Code for the German Empire took effect, up until June 11, 1994. Over the course of its existence, it has been altered a couple of times. The paragraph penalized homosexual acts between men and placed it on the same level with sexual acts committed to animals. Allow me to cite a translated version of the original paragraph from 1872's Criminal Code for the German Empire now. The deviate fornication that is done by two people of the male gender or done by people with animals is to be punished with jail. It is further possible to expand on this punishment by the means of disenfranchisement or loss of civil rights. Not only the equalization of homosexuality and bestiality is something a modern society would rebel against, the fact that this is only punishing homosexual acts between men is so wrong. In 1935, the National Socialist Party divided paragraph 175 into separate segments. Bestiality got separated from homosexuality and now fell under paragraph 175 section B. At the same time, the punishable offense for homosexual acts were extended. At first, these acts were only the ones that resembled actual sexual acts. Now every so-called lewd behavior was punishable. The exact definition of lewd, however, was not elaborated any further. Simultaneously, the sentencing of 6 months jail time was up to 5 years in prison. But this was still not enough for the Nazis. Paragraph 175, section A, put a new law in order in which the severe cases of these aforementioned lewd homosexual acts between men had to look at up to even 10 years workhouse. The Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic acted very differently on paragraph 175 after World War II ended. The GDR in 1950 returned to the original version of 1872, getting rid of the draconic punishments of the Third Reich. At the same time, sections A and B of the paragraph in itself state. Only the maximum sentencing was lowered. This stood until the end of the 50s, when homosexual acts amongst adults was not punishable anymore. The new criminal code of the GDR from 1968 did punish homosexual acts between minors still. This punishment was to be put on homosexual acts between male people as well as females. On July 1st, 1989, this paragraph was eradicated entirely. So much for the GDR, but Frankfurt Main was in West Germany. How did they act on homosexuals? The Federal Republic of Germany did reform paragraph 175 2 times as well until the German reunification and got rid of it completely in 1994. After the second reform of the paragraph, only homosexual acts done by an adult to a minor were punished. The age of consent for women got placed at 14 years and stood for heterosexual acts as well as for homosexual acts. Despite this still unequal jurisdiction, the real question is, when did West Germany reform paragraph 175? Believe it or not, the very first alteration of paragraph 175 was done in West Germany as late as in 1969. Until then, when it came to homosexuality, the laws of the Third Reich were still in effect. This means that the law on people like Heinz Pullman was as follows. Paragraph 175. 1. A man who whores with another man or lets himself be abused for fornication is to be punished with jail. 2. to a person involved who at that time has not reached his 21st year of age, the court is allowed to let the person go unpunished if the offense is minor. Paragraph 175a. With jail time of up to 10 years, 5 years if extenuating circumstances apply but not under 3 months jail time, a person is to be punished who 1. As a male forces another male by physical harm or by threatening this person with physical harm or death to participate in fornication or to be abused for said fornication. 2. A male who, under abuse of a position of power over another male, orders him to participate in fornication or to let himself be abused for said fornication. 3. A male who has reached or overgone the age of 21 years who seduces a male under the age of 21 years to participate in fornication or to be abused for said fornication. And number 4. A male who for gain participates in fornication with other males, lets himself being abused for said fornication, or offers such services. Paragraph 175b. To deviate fornication that is done by a human to animals is to be punished with jail. It is further possible to expand on this punishment by the means of disenfranchisement or loss of civil rights. So this was the law at the times of Rosemarie Nitribitt. Prosecution of homosexuals just like in the Third Reich. And they had been hunted just as like. Police forces stormed known meeting places for homosexuals like bars, cafes, dance clubs, cinemas, etc. on a regular basis. Police brutality was a common occurrence, and there had even been high-level officials within politics and police forces that had the actual goal to put an end to the 175ers and Frankfurt mine. Because, you see, not only the laws of the Third Reich remained effective, the people living in the country were still the same, with the same mindset as they had a mere 10 years ago, and many of them had been placed in positions of power, with this law still on their side. Pohlmann had one foot in the jail already. He was on probation all the time and due to his homosexuality alone under permanent surveillance. If he would come under any scrutiny for his homosexuality or his criminal activities, he was looking at a long time in jail. Because of his debts, however, Pohlmann was under even more pressure than already. He owed the Ritter Company alone, for whom he acted as a salesman, 11,000 German marks. He had ordered a car for another 9,000 German marks, and he had about 10,000 more German marks debt divided between a couple of other creditors who all wanted their money back. The Ritter Company already threatened him with a lawsuit if he would not pay up soon. His friendship and symbiotic relationship with the wealthy Rosemarie could have saved him on more than just one occasion. But, as I already stated, Rosemarie was stingy with her money. Heinz might not have gotten much financial benefit from her. Pohlmann knew that a lot of people would be investigated after Rosemarie's death, and he too would have to prepare for their visit. So he decided to preemptively call the police and talk to the lead investigator. He offered his full cooperation with the case. This, however, was not a wise decision as it seemed. Police forces interpreted his call as a distraction. They were prepared for the killer to call them in an attempt to put himself in a better light and thus take himself out of the spotlight. Since Pohlmann was already under the pressure of possible jail time and he had been a suspect early on due to his relationship with Rosemarie, this act to investigators at least did fit perfectly. Strangely enough, Pohlmann did pay all his debts just after Rosemarie died, something that pricked up investigators' ears even more. Rosemarie was known for having about 20,000 German marks or even more hidden in her flat at all times. The last 2 months between her death, she did not put any money into her bank account and did not take out anything either. However, in Rosemarie's flat, nothing was ransacked, but there was no money either. Someone who knew about the hidden money and where it was stored must have taken it. Pohlmann, as a valued friend, did know about the stash, and the amount was actually pretty much the sum he needed to pay his debts. This was enough for police forces to apprehend him. To them, the case was clear. It was a simple murder and robbery. During his interrogation, his homosexuality of course came up as well. Knowing that for this alone he was looking at the jail sentencing, he stated that he was only 30% of a homosexual and did have sexual intercourse with women also. Concerning the money that paid his debt, Pohlmann testified several different stories. One time it was savings, one other time it was an inheritance, etc. However, his debts were not the only lead pointing to him being the killer. Pohlmann served as kind of an assistant to Rosemarie. Other than just personal security and being a bodyguard, he took up many things to help her out, like walking the dog, shopping, and cooking her rice pudding. A witness stated that on October 29th, he saw Pohlmann racing a sedan out of the parking space behind Rosemarie's apartment complex, nearly hitting him. A pair of pants that he gave to a friend for having them altered allegedly had some specks of blood on them. All this was enough to have Pohlmann put into custody and later charge him with murder. You already know how that went. But before we take on the real scandal, let's look at the crime scene, the investigation process, and the police's reconstruction of the case that was used to charge Pohlmann a little closer. Rosemarie was lying face up at her sofa. One leg was on it, the other one under it. This is a typical view if you get strangled or suffocated while on the ground. You toss and turn your legs in hopes of wiggling free or getting the attacker off of you. Rosemarie laid next to a table. On the other side, there were the glass ashtray and glass fragments, as well as a bloodied-up telephone handpiece. The ashtray and the glass fragments point to Rosemarie having been struck with the ashtray prior to a choking or suffocation, and the telephone handpiece points to her having at least wanted to call someone before she got struck from behind with said ashtray. Because of the positioning of the items and the body, it is possible that the killer might have sat at the place where Rosemarie's body was found at first. Maybe she stood in front of him or sat beside him at the place closer to the telephone. She was using the phone when the killer struck her with the ashtray and started to choke her. Police thinks that because of the evidence, Rosemarie at least for some time got choked from behind. So, the killer attacked her from behind, they moved to the couch as they struggled in the fight, and Rosemarie fell on the piece of furniture, her head pointing to the side of the table where her body was later found. Now the killer positioned himself on top of her and started choking her from the front. They skittered down the couch to the floor where she tossed her legs in a panic. The killer sat on her chest and choked her to death, took the money, maybe turned up the heating, and left the scene. This at least is what Frankfurt's police seem to believe. There still is a detail that needs to be talked about. Rosemarie had a tape recorder which she used to record many of her chats with customers. Oftentimes she used the recordings to blackmail them later on. Sometimes the customers wanted some role plays which she occasionally did record too. Investigators found a recording on a tape in the machine. The tape was allegedly already partially erased, and the tape itself has disappeared since. A police transcript is all that states what allegedly has been left on the recording. Rosemarie greets a person and offers a cognac. Later her voice is calling, "Let go of me." This recording is no insignificant lead surrounding speculations about Rosemarie's death. Was this the tape that actually recorded the murder? If so, why did only parts get erased? Why did the killer not take the whole tape? No worries, I will answer these questions, but for now, let's return to the trial surrounding Heinz Pohlmann. The time of death of Rosemarie was set and used by police for the accusations in a way that it could only lead to Pohlmann's acquittal. Even though a lot of leads pointed to him, witnesses were able to prove that at the time of her suggested killing, Rosemarie Nitribitt was still very much alive. She was seen walking to the butcher shop buying some meat for her dog. This meat was also found in the refrigerator of Rosemarie, supporting the evidence. Time of death and the whole reconstruction of events went down the shitter at once. Pohlmann, racing out of the parking lot, was now not of any concern for the murder. The alleged blood on the pants he gave a friend could not have been from Rosemarie either. All the leads became irrelevant at once. Judges explained the acquittance with the statement that even though Heinz Pohlmann most likely stole the money from Rosemarie, he just as likely is not her murderer. After the trial, Pohlmann gave a statement that until today is shrouded in mystery. "I could have said much more to defend my case." A sentence that seemed mysterious at first, but it will make a lot of sense later on, just as many other things, trust me. How was it possible for police forces to be wrong about the time of Rosemarie's death that much? In short, they were at least partially absolutely inept, negligent, and, as I intend to prove later, blatantly corrupt. The time of the murder at first has to be put between October 29th, the day Rosemarie was last seen alive, and November 1st, the day her body was found, and the date that until today, as it is now known, is wrongfully carved into a tombstone. It is pretty much common knowledge that during a crime scene investigation, nothing, and I mean nothing, can be altered at the scene. Let's put it this way. This knowledge seems to have eluded investigators back then. For example, one method to find the time of death is to measure the room temperature. Take a body, a heated room including the floor heating, and 3 days, and you get a rapid decaying process including the stench. This stench led to investigators to, instead of measuring the room temperature, just go ahead and opening the windows because they could not stand the smell. And with that, a precise determination of the time of death was not possible anymore. To not mess with evidence on the scene, investigators today get sterile overalls and the order to only allow the people absolutely necessary at the scene. Both again was ignored. Up to 17 people were in Rosemarie's flat at one time, police and media alike. Evidence has been trampled and smushed. Investigators had only the normal clothing and actually hanged their coats at Rosemarie's own clothes hanger in the flat. One investigator even, Commissioner Conrad, just put his head on the floor behind the bedroom door, where it was labeled by the media as a piece of clothing left by the killer. The aforementioned milk and buns that were delivered to her door did not get taken in as evidence. Instead, the maid either threw them away or flat out ate the evidence. And this was just the investigators' fuck-ups. We will look at the blatant corruption in given time. Due to the problems with determining an exact time of death, police was reconstructing their version of the events, with the killing taking place right after Rosemarie's last customer left the apartment, or when Pullman himself was visiting Rosemarie, which was clear due to the witness testimony of the maid. The maid, Erna, went to Rosemarie but got kicked out after a short heated argument. We will take a short closer look at her too later on. The time of the murder, as I said, was proven to be wrong. An analysis of the contents of Rosemarie's stomach enabled investigators later to determine a way more exact time of death, and thus reconstruct her last hours way more accurately. These insights led to Rosemarie's last day being reconstructed as follows. At around 1 p.m., Pullman visits Rosemarie. He has a cold. Pullman is sweating and does not feel too well. He drinks multiple shots of the plum brandy Slivovitz. At about 2 p.m., Erna Krieger, the maid, enters the apartment. Rosemarie had a very close relationship with her, up to the point when Erna shattered a very valuable vase that one of Rosemarie's customers gifted her. Additionally, Rosemarie accused her of stealing also. Erna, however, tried multiple times to patch up the relationship again. Erna is financially dependent on Rosemarie, but Rosemarie still kicked her out. At 2:45 p.m., Rosemarie's supposed last customer arrives. Rosemarie leads him to the bedroom to service him, while Pullman cooks rice pudding for Rosemarie and allegedly leaves the apartment right after. The last customer testified that the appointment was over after 45 minutes at about 3:30 p.m. He sat down on the couch to have a cigarette and a talk with Rosemarie, who ate the rice pudding prepared by Pullman and, to the customer, looked jittery. The customer left Rosemarie at about 4 p.m. Afterwards, witnesses stated that they have seen Rosemarie walking her dog to the butcher shop at around 4:15 p.m., buying some meat for her dog Joe. At 5 p.m., Rosemarie had an appointment at the Mercedes-Benz workshop where she never arrived. So, based on this, the time of her death could be at about 4:20 to 5 p.m. Rosemarie's car was an essential asset. It was vital for her work, her income, and her reputation. She had brought it into the workshop the night before, and it is very unlikely she would have missed this appointment. But the devil is in the detail, as we know, so the analysis of her stomach's contents is still in order to really rule out just an appointment that slipped her mind. This analysis confirmed that the last thing Rosemarie has eaten before her death was the rice pudding, and that this meal had been there for 1 to 1.5 hours before her organs stopped working. This confirms and solidifies the time of her death at between 4:20 p.m. and 5 p.m. on October 29, 1957. These more detailed insights, however, the investigators back then either did not have or they just flat out ignored them to put Pohlmann on trial. After it was proven that investigators' first determined time of death was impossible, leading to Pohlmann's acquittance, his alibi had to be rechecked for the new time. Pohlmann stated that after his visit at Rosemarie, he went home to his flat situated at Roderbergweg 217, a place that can be reached within 12 minutes by car. There, he said, he talked to a neighbor, took a bath, and talked at about 4 p.m. with his significant other. Oddly enough, there was no evidence proving this, as it seems. The neighbor he said he talked to and this significant other he said he called seemingly did not get interviewed by police. Pohlmann's new alibi is only solid from around 5:30 p.m. onwards due to witness reports. But why did the new alibi of Pohlmann not get looked into any further? Why were these witnesses not questioned? Sure, he was acquitted, so it seemed to be redundant, but there was always the possibility of a revision or an appeal. But why did nothing happen? The answer is, Heinz Pohlmann was a sacrificial lamb for police and politics and high society all along. After Pohlmann was acquitted, there was no second trial, even though there were already numerous leads and even evidence pointing to someone else entirely. I tried to tell and describe things as straight away as possible. However, I had to withhold a lot of information, answers, and circumstances to not make the retelling of the case too complicated right away. I hope you can forgive me for this. Rosemarie Nitribitt was a high-class prostitute, meaning she was not an unknown person in high society, and as such, she was able to freely choose her customers other than most. And this is what she did. If someone matched her taste and looked wealthy enough, she started to talk to them first. Sometimes she even kind of lay in wait for possible customers. These customers included the most rich and powerful men in West Germany and even international names. Just to give some examples on who she served, her customers included, amongst others, Harald Quandt, Gunther Sachs, and the later to become the third Chancellor of Germany, Kurt Georg Kiesinger. And after Rosemarie's murder, they all were possible suspects and witnesses to be interviewed by police. And they all, of course, got special treatment. Behind closed doors, with no one else present, they got interrogated by the Chief Commissioner himself. And of course, not very thoroughly. And everyone was of course free to leave without being pestered any further after these interviews. One of these people was Harald II, as Rosemarie put him in her calendar and contacts. Harald I was the aforementioned Harald Quandt. Harald II was Harald von Bohlen und Halbach. This name may not ring any bells right away, but what if I say Krupp? Exactly, the Krupp. For some time largest economical company in the world, today known as ThyssenKrupp. The company that, amongst others, patented stainless steel and was responsible for the Miracle on the Rhine. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach was the heir of the Krupp fortune and considered the wealthiest man in Germany. The Krupp family dynasty, however, was known to be very close to each and every government they lived under. They worked as a supplier for the weapons industry and constructed, for example, the famous cannon Dicke Bertha. During World War II, Krupp was the weapons manufacturer for the Third Reich. Due to the company using slave and forced laborer, the last sole proprietor of the company, Alfred Felix Alvin Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach, had to defend himself at the famous Nuremberg trials. His younger brother, Harald, would have been the next in the line of succession, but this was ultimately prevented by the Mehlemer contract. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach was an officer and adjutant of the commanding artillery general stationed in Romania during World War II. As the Wehrmacht capitulated in 1944, Harald was taken as a prisoner of war, but he was able to, for some time at least, hide his true identity. As his identity was discovered, he was of course a very valuable prisoner, The Soviet command put him in a prison camp for state prisoners in Moscow. During a state trial, he was sentenced to 25 years in a labor camp. He was accused of having hosted high-ranking Nazis in his family's villa, even Adolf Hitler himself. He further was accused of having worked as a spy in Romania. Harald spent 5 years in an iron mine near Sverdlovsk. On a regular basis, he was studied, as he called his interrogations. Cold and calculating, he said about these interrogations, "They study me, and I study them." Harald got forced by the Melmer contract to give up the company of his family. As a compensation, he was given 10 million German marks. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach returned with the last prisoners from the Soviet Union in 1955, returning to his family in Essen and becoming a business partner of his brother Berthold, who amongst others invested in the company Vasak AG. So, even though Harald lost his inheritance of the company itself, he was anything but poor. He stayed in only the most prestigious hotels and was, despite his past regarding the Third Reich, a well-respected member of society. Even so much that people still admired him just for existing. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach and Rosemarie Nitribitt first met 3 months before the murder. But they were everything but just a prostitute and her customer. At least as far as Harald was concerned. Harald fell in love. He and Rosemarie built up a relationship that surpassed the meetings between a prostitute and her customer. Even though Harald did pay for Rosemarie's service, they did not have intercourse on every occasion. Plus, he also did shower her with gifts and valuables and wrote love letters and even poems. There were even photographs of him in Rosemarie's apartment visible to everyone. In his letters, he calls her his little foal or his fawn, displayed his affection in any way he could, and expressed his concerns for her well-being and safety. He even went as far as to show himself with her in public like a real couple. At least one time, even though he was scared of getting recognized and starting a scandal. Just to name 2 examples of Harald's displays of affection, let's look at 2 of his letters to Rosemarie. "Your breast's love hills are Harvey's biggest dream. To rest even for one night only on these moonlight-like pale blossoming hills, Harvey's would without a second thought give his soul bliss away. Even more so, he would part with his cup, his beloved cup forevermore. This means a lot by Allah. If he could just rest one night on these moonlight-like pale blossoming hills." Beloved Fawn, shortly before my leave to Switzerland, a few lines for you, because whether you believe it or not, I often think of you, especially in the hours of beautiful experiences, because I wish you would be with me then. Be virtuous and sensible, so you would stay my ever-so-bettering Fawn. Your Harald. The topic of a wedding even emerged. Rosemarie wanted to marry Harald. Whether she was just as in love as Harald is to be doubted. In front of her friends, she stated that she wanted to find a safe haven and was very upset by the amount of financial and material donations. As far as Rosemarie was concerned, Harald was very much able to spend way more on her. On the other hand, Harald was Rosemarie's type of man. Slender, distinctive facial features, soldier-like, just as the first customers of the little girl she was when she started to prostitute herself. Harald himself just answered regarding the topic of a marriage that they would have to go to the moon for that. A man like him marrying a high-class prostitute was inconceivable. At least to Harald. And at least officially. Why do I doubt this very stringent stance of Harald von Bohlen und Halbach? Semantics. I know it might sound like hair-splitting, but reading that last sentence of the second letter, I get a quaint feeling of Harald maybe having hopes and even first plans. I mean, it did not necessarily had to be the moon, just far away enough. With Rosemarie, his ever-so-bettering fawn. What did he want to express with this? Bettering in what? As a person? Because he wanted her to be virtuous and sensible? In the context of his displays of love, it would actually make sense for him to wish or hope for Rosemarie giving up on prostitution by giving her all he could on an emotional level, proving that he was not just another customer and he wanted to become even more. As I said, It sounds like hair splitting, and it is a mere speculation, but it makes sense in the context of things. After all, he did show himself in public with her. He did risk his reputation, his place in society, and even risked to get abandoned by everyone he knew for this woman. And all this just to go and buy some new bedding with her. This very fragile relationship between the two continued. Whether Rosemarie did want to marry Harald out of pure love, or just sold him the so-called girlfriend experience due to his denial of a marriage, is open to scrutiny, but in the end not even very relevant for the matter at hand. Rosemarie's death shook up her former customers. Many called up police to give their testimonies in a secured environment, only to the lead investigator, as did Harald von Bohlen und Halbach too, who was interrogated on a Sunday late afternoon when nobody would have catched him. He too wanted investigators and attorneys not to cover up or hush up anything and offered his full cooperation, just as Heinz Pohlmann did. However, evidence got altered, hushed up, and embezzled in favor of Harald von Bohlen und Halbach. Even blatant manipulation and corruption had been used to just keep Harald von Bohlen und Halbach's name out of the investigations and the trial. Besides the love letters, pictures, and postcards from Harald, there had been a lot of objects belonging to the company Krupp in Rosemarie's apartment. During investigations, all these personal items from Harald had been embezzled and hidden to not put Harald in the spotlight as soon as media would have entered the scene. Harald was not able to deny knowing Rosemarie, but could hide the depth of their relationship for the time of his life. And thus he found himself at the police station to discuss his alibi and testify. This was not something the main investigation unit handled, however. They did let their colleagues from Essen handle this part, and the whole town of Essen close to worship the Krupps. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach got interrogated. The time of Rosemarie's death, however, was put in between October 29th and November 1st, so he got asked about his whereabouts on these 3 days and especially the nights. Investigators took special interest in the nights between these days, and Harald cited a couple of appointments that got confirmed by his maid at first. However, the statements concerning the more crucial times had been a little bit wilder. One time they sat with a priest from the town of Essen, another time they said they were at the Krupps Villa Hügel in Essen at the concert, and after this they had dinner at the restaurant Essener Hof. Pretty inconsistent and thus not very surprising actually. Since the nights were of special interest to investigators, a time where one could not cite any appointments from the back of your hand, and where these appointments could not be found in books or cited by your employees, the testimonies got even more vague. Not even the chauffeur himself was able to tell whether Harald's Jaguar had been moved at night for any prolonged period of time. The maid, however, had the perfect alibi prepared for Harald. Buckle up, my friends. This is going to be a doozy. The maid testified as follows. After the death of his mother, I felt responsible. I would have felt it if he would have been absent for a longer time. I have no clue how you feel about this alibi, but I am convinced, and so were the Essen police investigators. In their report, investigators stated that the family was operating under a strict patriarchic regime, and nightly drives from Essen to Frankfurt and back would most definitely have been noticed. I am at a loss of words right now. To be honest, I can't even begin to fathom how wrong on how many levels this is. Especially since the real time of death was definitely not at night. But with this alibi, Harald von Bohlen und Halbach was off the hook. Even after Pohlmann's acquittance, his alibi did not get re-evaluated. Police just did not give a damn. At Rosemarie's apartment, investigators found a bottle Beaujolais red wine with the signet of the Krupps private winery. This bottle was already opened. Something everyone who knew Rosemarie immediately found odd. Rosemarie was exceptionally tidy. Leaving an opened bottle of red wine in her apartment was not like her. Of course, this meant that the bottle was most likely an item that was directly connected to the killer and might even have been opened by the murderer, or at least started with. Take a wild guess whose fingerprints had been found on the bottle in a position where you would place them while opening it. When investigators interrogated Harald von Bohlen und Halbach, the results of the dactyloscopic examination were not ready yet. If you would think now that police would take a closer look after learning his fingerprints were on the bottle, thus putting him as a prime suspect in the murder, you'd be wrong. They were absolutely not interested in interrogating him any further. For reasons of integrity, I have to clear something up about the bottle's placement. Some sources state that the wine bottle was situated on the table in Rosemarie's room, but in the police report it seemed like the bottle was found on or in a cabinet. If it was on the table, I believe it would have been knocked over during the fight, but the placement of the bottle is not very significant actually. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach himself stated that he gifted Rosemarie a whole crate of red wine bottles. If it was a whole crate, the fingerprints on this one bottle are way more significant than the placing of it, because if this bottle came from the crate, only Harald could have taken it out of there and placed it wherever it was found. And he took it out to have a drink. Any other way, the bottle would most likely had still been with the others, maybe even still placed in said crate. It would not have been found all alone, opened and with only Harald von Bohlen und Halbach's fingerprints on it. Additionally, Harald stated at his interrogation that he last visited Rosemarie on October 23rd, 1 whole week before Rosemarie's murder. With only Harald's fingerprints on the bottle, it is pretty much ruled out that Rosemarie uncorked the bottle one day. Plus, this would mean the bottle would have been placed in an opened state for a whole week out in the open in her apartment, which was just as unlikely, no matter how valuable the contents would have been or who gifted her the bottle. But what was the deal with Pohlmann's statement after the trial now? What was it he could have said to defend his case? Did Pohlmann knew who the real murderer was and held his tongue? It looks like Harald's demands of a complete exposure of each and every connection regarding the murder of Rosemarie Nitribitt was not as serious as it seemed. Heinz Pohlmann got actually paid to not name Harald von Bohlen und Halbach in court. Pohlmann was in custody for some time. Between his custody and the trial, he used his fame and the craving of media to find any scandal to his advantage and gain. He made a deal. Now that Rosemarie was dead, he was allowed to talk freely about her contacts as far as the media was concerned, however, and Pohlmann was going to feed them. He contacted the magazine Quick and offered them to talk about Rosemarie's customers and friends without any restraint. He distinctively mentioned a 500 horsepower man, and he could only have been talking about one person. Harald learned about this in the main office of the Warsag AG. The chief representative of the Krupp company is with him at that point in time. Since 1953, he had this job, and since the death of Harald's mother, the family's matriarch, in fall 1957, he pulled the strings and called the shots. His name was Berthold Beitz, and he decided to use a middleman from Hamburg to prevent Pohlmann from mentioning Harald's name. 250,000 German marks from the company were set to buy Pohlmann's silence. This also meant that he was not to speak about Harald at his own trial, since media coverage was guaranteed. This was at least as long as his legal defense could allow such silence. The contract agreed on consisted of 10 articles and was set up with a name named Joachim Hansen. He was to take the deal instead of the Krupps themselves. Allow me to cite this contract. I will of course leave out any information on the living and working addresses of the people involved. Contract between the salesman Joachim Hansen, Hamburg, represented by the attorney Dr. Herbert Ernst Müller, and Mr. Heinz Pohlmann, represented by the attorneys Dr. Werner Stock and Dr. Walter Hass. Number 1. Mr. Heinz Pohlmann has stated to the attorney of Mr. Hansen that he has taken up a contract with a film company over his partaking in a movie called The Truth About Rosemarie, that he further has multiple offerings from other film companies, and that internal and foreign magazines contacted him directly or by the means of the use of middlemen to publicize or cinematize his personal experiences with Mrs. Rosemarie Nitribitt and eminently respectable people from the Federal German Republic. Mr. Hansen has knowledge about Mr. Pohlmann's knowledge since Mr. Pohlmann participated in an interview with the magazine Quick. He contacted Mr. Pohlmann with the intent of discussing the further handling of the topic towards media and the public. Both contracting parties, after intense talks, agree on the following. Point 2. Mr. Pohlmann commits himself to not make any use of his knowledge on the connections discussed under point 1 regarding Rosemarie Nitribitt and her company with third parties. He transfers his personal rights regarding the knowledge described beforehand to Mr. Hansen. Point 3. Mr. Pohlmann commits himself to cancel his contract with the Rapid Film Media Company over his partaking in the movie The Truth About Rosemarie right after this contract becomes legally effective. He also commits himself to not partake in the preparation or production of said movie. Point 4. Mr. Hansen has knowledge on Mr. Pohlmann's contract of publication with the publisher Martens & Co. Mr. Pohlmann commits himself to work towards a stopping of any publications in the magazine Quick regarding the interview series Pohlmann Reports. He also commits to attempting to retransfer any rights on a publication of a book on the, in point 5 of this contract mentioned case of Rosemarie Nitribitt, to Mr. Hansen. Point 5. All the commitments of Mr. Pohlmann mentioned above do not apply if his defense in court, should it come to a trial against him on the case of Rosemarie Nitribitt, would hinder his defending of his case. Any decision about this lies in the hands of his legal advisors only. Point 6. Mr. Pohlmann commits to handing each and every scripture or writing that is or may be in connection to any publication on the case depicted in point 1 of this contract to Mr. Hansen. Point 7. Mr. Hansen commits to paying Mr. Pohlmann a sum of 250,000 German marks as follows. A. 100,000 German marks after this contract is signed by both parties. B. 75,000 German marks 1 year after this contract comes into effect. C. 75,000 German marks 3 months after the final settlement of the criminal process, latest to be paid, however, on December 21, 1960. Should the criminal procedure against Mr. Pohlmann, that is in the hands of the prosecution of Frankfurt-Main's investigating judge, or at the District Court of Frankfurt-Main, docket number, respectively, get legally binding or discontinued before the date of February 28, 1960, the complete remaining sum of 150,000 German marks is due and is to be paid at the moment of the legally binding finalization of the aforementioned criminal procedure. The amount of 150,000 German marks is to be prepared for payment by the means of absolute guarantee of a major bank and is due for payout of 75,000 German marks on March 1, 1960 latest, or after providing a confirmation of legal validity concerning the discontinuation of the aforementioned criminal procedure regarding Mr. Pohlmann. This bond is also due for payment by the means of confirmation from attorney Dr. Herbert Ernst Müller, the lawyerly representative of the contract party mentioned in point 1. Point 8. Mr. Hansen has knowledge on Mr. Pohlmann's participation in the movie The Truth About Rosemarie. In case of any claims for compensation for any kind of cancellation of the contract closed with the Rapid Film Company, Mr. Hansen commits to keeping Mr. Pohlmann free of any claims. Mr. Pohlmann commits to informing Mr. Hansen about any claims made by the Rapid Film Company or any legal successors as soon as they are put against him, and let him participate in the solution of these litigations in a way that Mr. Hansen can make decisive use of his assets with Mr. Pohlmann's attorney of record. The legal costs that may apply in connection to any aforementioned claims are paid for by Mr. Hansen. Point 9. The place of jurisdiction is. Point 10. The costs applying to this contract bears Mr. Hansen. Munich. Date. This contract gives Pohlmann the option of mentioning names nonetheless, at least if it ever becomes necessary to defend his case. After all, he could not make any use of the money when serving the life sentence. However, the sum presented was more than enough to provide a strong reason to not mention Harald von Bohlen und Halbach, and Pohlmann rules with it. He terminated his contracts and did not reveal names to the media, but the Krupps still prolonged the signing of the contract, because despite still keeping quiet, Pohlmann continued to rally the media around him. This may have been a reassurance by Pohlmann, but the Krupps are nervous about him possibly taking off with the money and still taking his knowledge to the public for further gain anyways. They deny signing the contract themselves, and in the end, Pohlmann in 1959, 2 years after Rosemarie's death, is forced to take action in writing a letter to Bertolt Beitz, using the aforementioned leverage of knowledge to his advantage. He wants to enforce the signing of his contract with Mr. Hansen, or better said, Mr. Beitz and Mr. von Bohlen und Halbach. Pohlmann's letter reads as follows. Dear Mr. Beitz, my name should be known to you. The attorney, Dr. name is censored, told us that you and also Mr. Alfred Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach were informed about our negotiations in Munich and Frankfurt due to preliminary talks. Dr. name censored, told us during the negotiations that the contract was 95% safe, leading to me giving up certain connections back then already. If I write you today, then it is because I am left with nothing, and foreign press as well as the movie media makes advances to getting me to earn money by less enjoyable means. These people want to know names and more from me, to feed their need for scandals to fuel their businesses. Contrary to media reports from yesterday, it is untrue that I already signed a contract with a foreign movie company. Yesterday, I got provided with a script for a movie that is to be filmed starting on April 20th. Here too, with your support, I could change a lot. I myself do not wish for anything more than peace, and for the good of your own house, you could help me. View this letter in the way it is meant. I do not want anything gifted from you. Since I have to make a decision at the end of this week, I would be very thankful if you would contact me as soon as possible. Respectfully, Heinz Pohlmann. Pohlmann's letter is calculating. The mistake he made by already fulfilling his part of a deal that was yet to be sealed off officially had to be ironed out. He still had all the information to become rich, but the media interest would eventually die down, taking all the profit he could make with it. Pohlmann was still living beyond his means. The solution to all his problems was in the palm of his hands, and he just had to decide on an action. If he went to the media, he would make a very powerful enemy. If he continues his silence, he would not have to worry about this enemy, but at the situation at hand, it was neither profitable nor helpful to him at all. The original contract did not get signed ever. There still are speculations about a payment of 50,000 German marks though. I personally believe it is very much possible that Pohlmann still got paid other than by the means of an official and thus retraceable contract between Beitz and him, or better said, Hansen and him. After all, during the 13-day trial against Pohlmann in 1960, he did not say a single word about Harald von Bohlen und Halbach. And also, he terminated his contracts with the magazine quick, and all that was left was his cryptic last sentence of, "I could have said much more to defend my case." So what did Pohlmann knew? After all I presented until now, I personally am convinced that Pohlmann was way too dependent on Rosemarie as a friend, money giver and alibi against his state as a 175er. The maid too was just as dependent on Rosemarie as well. Plus, even though they had an ongoing argument, she was worried about Rosemarie and tried multiple times to solve their issues. A lot of people think also that Rosemarie was starting to work around the main station again, where organized prostitution rings started to settle down, and a pimp might not have liked the sight of an independent prostitute taking away customers from their businesses and killed Rosemarie. In my opinion, this is not very likely considering the way Rosemarie was killed. He would have used her to set a warning example. He would have beat her to death brutally, stabbed her or shot her execution style. There would not have been a struggle or prolonged fight resulting in choking her to death. It would have been brutal, swift and clean. Taking the characters of the people involved, the societal circumstances and the relations between the murderer, the victim, police, politics and the public, there is only one conclusion to me. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach was the killer of Rosemarie Nitribitt, and he was not the only one who committed a crime towards her that day. Let us use all we know up until now and put together the puzzle pieces. Having been an army officer in World War II with possible training in espionage and also being someone who endured 5 years of work camp in Russia, including interrogations and possible torture, Harald von Bohlen und Halbach was anything but harmless or stable. I would like to think. All of this does not go by without leaving its mark on you. Harald returns home and finds his dynasty in shambles. The company he was about to inherit is no more his to rule over alone. 10 million German marks, however, do provide a nice financial cushion. Plus, society doesn't care about his doings during the war. Even him apparently having hosted Hitler himself did not seem to matter. It felt like absolution. The city of Essen did admire him just as much as before, as if nothing ever happened. With his financial wealth, Harald makes good for everything he had to pass on during war and imprisonment. Luxury, peace of mind, and distraction. During a stay in Frankfurt, a beautiful young woman approaches him. He climbs into a car, they go on a ride through the city. Later, they enter a no-tell motel in disguise that looks like an ordinary residence. They introduce themselves as a couple. Harald already knows he is dealing with a prostitute, but he doesn't care. He pays 200 German marks. Over the next months, they meet up on multiple occasions. This woman gives him attention. She gives him more than that, and all of it on more than just a physical level. She gives him the girlfriend experience. Soon she's more than that to him. Harald found someone who pulled him out of his own world, and he falls in love. Rosemarie is way more calculating, however. Even though she is sold on Harald, she is even more so on his wealth. Men like him, highly regarded, close to being immune to any kind of accusations, were using her for their amusement all since she was that 11-year-old girl in Niedermendig. She turned the table on men, and Harald would not make any exception to this. She wants more money. She wants to take him to the cleaners, and a marriage would be the ultimate way to do so. Rosemarie knows how much in love Harald is. Even though he gifts her too little for her liking, he still writes love letters, poems, and is even willing to risk his reputation and losing his face by going shopping with her as a couple. Rosemarie tests her influence on him on multiple occasions and tries to get a feeling for just how much she can manipulate Harald in doing her bidding. When she starts to turn the conversation towards a marriage, Harald does not flat out refuse per se. He answered that in order to do so they would have to move to the moon. He did not say he did not want to marry her, only that the societal circumstances would not allow it without massive drawbacks. No refusal, no turning down, only doubts on the how. On October 29th, Pullman visits Rosemarie. They talk and have some drinks. Rosemarie expects a customer. As she often does, she prepares her tape recorder and is already recording the events in secret. They talk, and maybe Harald's name comes up regarding a visit on the same day too. Pullman is sick, and he has a lot of worries. The Ritter Company threatens him with a lawsuit due to his still unpaid debts. A lawsuit that will lead to him getting jail time for sure. He is in desperate need for money, at least enough to pay his debts. After Rosemarie kicks out her maid Anna after an argument, she prepares for her appointment. Pullman often gets aggressive after the consumption of alcohol and acts inconsiderately. The slivovitz he drank went to his head. As Rosemarie services a customer in the bedroom, he prepares the rice pudding. Pullman is unobserved, his body and mind are weak, and his judgment is tarnished. As a friend, Pullman knows about the secret stash of Rosemarie. He finishes preparing the rice pudding, grabs the money, and leaves the apartment in a hurry. He jumps into his car, races away, and nearly hits a pedestrian that testifies later on in the trial against him. Pullman can't just turn around now and just put back the money. He has to pull through with it now. After the appointment with Rosemarie, her customer has a short chat with her and a cigarette, during which Rosemarie eats the rice pudding. At 4 p.m., the customer leaves the apartment, and Rosemarie leaves with her dog for the butcher as well to buy her little Joe some meat. Back home, she puts it in a refrigerator and cleans the apartment and prepares to take a shower or a bath. She takes a folded terry towel and is on her way to the bathroom, and all of a sudden Harald von Bohlen und Halbach visits. He wants to spend a nice evening with his love and brings a bottle of red wine which he uncorks. Rosemarie tells him that he has to go to the Mercedes-Benz workshop to pick up her car, which broke down the night before and had to be repaired urgently. Rosemarie does not want Harald to be alone in her apartment and again tries to check how much she can influence him. She offers him to accompany her to the dealership, just as he did when they were buying the new bedding. Harald refuses. He is still concerned about losing his face and doesn't want to take the risk again. Rosemarie herself becomes impatient. She feels neglected, underappreciated, and demands more proof of his love. She wants to bind Harald to herself. All the while, he is still concerned about his reputation. Still, he is hurt by Rosemarie's words and her accusations, and the statement that she had no time for him because she needs to pick up the car, which she needs to find other men to sleep with. Harald places the opened bottle on the cabinet and faces her. An argument ensues. One word leads to another. Maybe Rosemarie, the calculating person that she is, uses another argument of which she knows it would hit hard on Harald. The bedding they bought together. Whether true or not, she just served a customer on this very same bedding he bought with her together under great risk. She just had slept with another man on it. The argument is about to escalate. Even though Harald still proceeds to assure his love for Rosemarie, his concerns about his reputations are still bigger. Rosemarie bursts with anger. She is sick and tired of getting ordered around and being put off. If his reputation is all that prevents Harald from marrying her and providing a financially safe life, that is something that could be taken care of pretty easily. All it needs is one simple call. Rosemarie throws her towel on the couch, grabs the phone and wants to call the media. She is about to tell the press how Harald von Bohlen und Halbach is not only a customer to the Nitribitt, but he is in love and would actually marry her. Harald's panic leads to a knee-jerk reaction. He walks over to Rosemarie and puts her in a chokehold. She orders him to let go of her, struggles and fights back. Harald takes the glass ashtray from the table and hits her over the head with it. He is dizzy, puts her hand on the wound and lets go of the telephone handpiece afterwards, while she falls onto the couch. Now Harald has no choice anymore. He could not let her live. No matter how much he hoped she would love him too, this argument and the assault would be his end either way. He throws himself on top of her and starts to choke the woman. His emotions get the better of him. His anger, his disappointment and all the mortifications would end now. Rosemarie still fights back. Both slither down the couch to the ground, where Harald continues to choke her. The towel falls down with them and rests under the struggling Rosemarie as she dies by Harald's hands. When Harald realizes what he just did, he stands up, becomes calculating and more self-controlled again, and leaves the apartment. Nobody knew about his visit, so he believes. But he forgets about the bottle of wine and he has no clue that the tape recorder was recording everything that just happened. 3 days later, police forces enter the apartment. Like amateurs, the first thing they do is opening all the windows, contaminate the crime scene in every way possible and behave uncoordinated and ragged. After all, Rosemarie was nothing but a mere prostitute, a wandering, talking scandal. A person that, as far as the public opinion was concerned, should not have even existed in the first place. During investigation, investigators found masses of items belonging to or making a connection to Harald von Bohlen und Halbach and the Krupp family's dynasty, including his love letters. A man of his status, an icon to the people, a pioneer in economics and richest person in Germany was visiting a prostitute? Even worse, he was in love with her? For the good of the West German society and its reputation, this must not be made public. Investigators take these distinct items away and hide them from the public eye and media. Later, they also find the recording, the ultimate and irrefutable evidence that had recorded the murder. Heinz Pohlmann's visit, the argument with Erna, the appointment with the customer, and the killing. It's all recorded on there. The investigators hear how Harald enters the apartment, the argument and the murder. This must not be true. The consequences of this scandal, the effect on the reputation of the West German people would be devastating. Investigators seized the tape to contemplate how to deal with the information. Pohlmann and von Bohlen und Halbach both know that they will come under scrutiny sooner or later. Both preemptively call the police to assure their full cooperation. The rich and powerful that Rosemarie had contact to are investigated only sloppily and interviewed behind closed doors. They all are protected by the lead investigators and high-ups of the police forces. The report regarding the fingerprints on the wine bottle are really just a formality now. Investigators already know that Harald von Bohlen und Halbach is the killer, but they have to keep up the illusion of a thorough investigation nonetheless. All the while, they try to figure out how to cover up the evidence leading to Harald. The colleagues in Essen, who not only looked up to the Krupps, but most likely were not even remotely neutral regarding the case at hand, consider themselves satisfied with spurious alibis and excuses. The presumed time of death was somewhere within the span of 3 days, and they do not want to pester the family and bring on such a devastating scandal in such a short time after the matriarch Bertha died. Secretly, they too do not want to know or accept the truth of one of their icons being a killer. Harald's training as an officer of the Wehrmacht, his possible training in espionage, and his experience with his interrogations by the Soviets in Sverdlovsk come in handy now. It enables him to cold-heartedly and in a calculating manner answer the police investigators' questions. He acts like, even though he gifted Rosemarie valuables, there was no deeper relationship or any emotional bonding at all. Even though police forces know about the letters, they do not poke around any further. At the same time, Harald took care of an alibi for himself. His maid knows his appointments, and only for the times when there were none, like the actual time of the murder, she has to resort to excuses. However, her claim of having the ability to just sense whether Harald is home or not is enough for investigators who themselves add their views on the family dynamics as a supporting claim of correctness of the alibi provided for him. The moment Heinz Pohlmann, that already hated 175er and petty criminal, calls police to assure his full cooperation in the case, the higher-ups get a sparking idea. The tape recording gets manipulated. Pohlmann's visit at Rosemarie's apartment is left on the tape. He admitted to having drunk some shots at her place, which is used by police. The rest of the tape is now deleted, all the way up to the moment of the killing, when Rosemarie pleads to be let go of, and investigators now craft a transcript for the few things left. This transcript now only shows Rosemarie welcoming a guest and offering this person some alcohol, and her begging to be let go of. This of course creates the illusion that whoever was greeted and offered the alcohol must also be the killer. To be absolutely safe, the tape gets destroyed, so the illusionistic transcript is all that's left. And it is now a valuable lead towards Heinz Pohlmann. Pohlmann is the perfect victim for such a scheme. A homosexual, petty criminal with debt who nobody would miss or nobody would think twice about guilt if put on trial. At the same time, Pohlmann even plays in the hands of investigators by paying his debts and buying a new car with the money he stole from Rosemarie. But still, Pohlmann could lead to Harald von Bohlen und Halbach. He knew about love letters. He was a familiar friend. If he would say the name Krupp, the public interest and greed for sensation of the media would inevitably lead to Harald von Bohlen und Halbach to come under closer inspection and pressure, and sooner or later the truth might be discovered still. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach and Berthold Beitz confer. The situation is dangerous. Harald's father, Alfred, who was on trial as a war criminal at the Nuremberg trials, has to step in. They know about Harald's relationship to Rosemarie and maybe even about his guilt. The decision is easy. Putting Pohlmann out of the way would be way too conspicuous and inevitably lead investigators in a direction that would ultimately put Harald in the spotlight and as a prime suspect. Pohlmann, however, is a money-driven person. The fact that police thinks his debts are the motive behind him killing Rosemarie plays in their favor. Pohlmann gets a deal. He leaves the name von Bohlen und Halbach out of his statements and testimonies. But Pohlmann is anything but stupid. Getting this kind of offer by the family Krupp of all people, who at the same time are the only ones out of all the high-ranking customers of Rosemarie that want him to stay quiet about their names, leads to him just putting one and one together. He recognizes the relationship crime and also his chance. Pohlmann, believing he is set for life, cancels the deals he already made with the media, but the contract does not get signed by Mr. Hansen for the Krupp family. He grows impatient and uses his criminal energy and his knowledge to get what he was promised. Even though the promised amount of 250,000 German marks is not paid, Pohlmann still had all the leverage. His threat is effective, and Pohlmann's silence gets paid for by Berthold Beitz before the trial against him starts. Pohlmann says nothing about Harald. By his order, his attorneys refrain from using any defense for their client that uses the name von Bohlen und Halbach too. The fact that the time of death back then was not put properly because of bad police work saves him from a conviction without the need of trying to shift the focus from himself onto Harald. Even though the judges believe in Pohlmann having robbed Rosemarie, the leads towards him also being the killer do not suffice. Pohlmann leaves the court with an acquittance, 50,000 German marks, and a lifelong leverage against the possibly mightiest family in Germany in his pocket. Heady with victory, he utters to the media interviewing him after the sentencing the now infamous sentence, "I could have said much more to defend my case." Pohlmann's acquittance forces investigators to re-evaluate all their leads and alibis. They are fully aware that Harald von Bohlen und Halbach has to move up as prime suspect. As by a miracle, however, call it a wonder, a freak coincidence, or, as I do in this case, a cover-up, 22 files regarding Harald von Bohlen und Halbach's connections to the life, work and death of Rosemarie Nitribitt suddenly just vanish. Pohlmann's alibi is not checked again, he is a free man. Pohlmann lived out the rest of his life financially secured in Munich, where he died in 1995. Harald von Bohlen und Halbach married 3 years after Rosemarie's death the 18 years his junior Dörte Hilfinghaus. He died in 1983 at the age of 76 due to an infection he sustained on a cruise trip. Only 7 years after his death it was made public that he had contact to Rosemarie at all. Still, due to the 22 case files still missing, nobody knew anything other than that he was one of her customers. The real depth of their relationship took another 23 years to surface. In 2013, Berthold Beitz died at the age of 99. He controlled the fate of the Krupp company to the last and, amongst other things, made the fusion with the company Thyssen possible. He was the very last actively involved confidant surrounding the murder and the situation between Harald von Bohlen und Halbach and Rosemarie Nitribitt. During an investigation on a scrap paper merchant who was illegally selling documents, just shy of Berthold Beitz's death, the aforementioned 22 case files on Rosemarie's murder suddenly resurfaced again, including all the leads, proof and protocols. Files that had been missing officially for over 50 years at that point, meaning since the trial of Heinz Pohlmann or shortly after when it came to re-evaluate the police's findings and leads. And they all lead to one person, the man Berthold Beitz tried to protect from police and media. Even the protocols proving that Berthold Beitz acknowledges that he did pay Heinz Pohlmann to stay quiet about Harald, which was a direct contradiction regarding Harald's claim on wanting a thorough investigation without any cover-ups, a copy of the contract to buy Pohlmann's silence, and a copy of the letter Pohlmann ultimately sent Berthold Beitz shortly before the trial. All were found in these long missing case files. But what were these files doing at the place of a scrap paper merchant, you ask? Nothing, because the files had been found sitting in the basement of the Frankfurt police station. Another funny coincidence. Not only did they disappear when there was no other option for police other than to look into Harald von Bohlen und Halbach thoroughly, they conveniently reappeared just after the last person who might have known about the truth about Harald's role in Rosemarie's death had passed away. And since they were in the police station's basement, where they would belong naturally in the meantime, it is even like these files didn't even vanish at all in the first place, but had rather been put away and got cold vanished to not force the police to accuse the highly respected Harald von Bohlen und Halbach. Rosemarie Nitribitt was laid to rest like a leper. Only very few people attended her funeral. Her half-sister Irmgard and 2 investigators from police forces. The minister refused to give an eulogy at all, and he also refused to escort the coffin to Rosemarie's final resting place. But this was still not enough, it seems. Her body was laid to rest without her head. The skull was deemed a piece of evidence, and due to the very visible head wound Rosemarie suffered, it was used as a prop to teach criminal investigators. In 2002, this piece of evidence in a still unsolved murder case got displayed in Frankfurt Police's headquarters Museum for Criminology. Due to it being a piece of evidence, there was no need to get any consent from Rosemarie's next of kin. Her half-sister Irmgard and a lot of people actually complained about this indecency, and authorities reacted by, no, not taking down the skull, that would have been a little too humane. They just continued to put it on display just behind frosted glass. Irmgard wanted the skull to be reunited with the rest of her sister's body, but authorities used the skull status as a piece of evidence to deny her, and Irmgard would ultimately had to pay for the skull's transfer. However, Irmgard's pension was way too low for doing that, even if authorities would have granted her the wish back then. Thus, Rosemarie's skull stayed on this morbid display for 6 more years. In 2008, without any warning, the brothel owner Hagen Selvicke, nicknamed Hako, entered the scene. He can and will not take the inhumane display of irreverence towards the dead prostitute and her family anymore. Authorities finally agree on a transfer of the skull. Their reason? Due to the case lying 51 years in the past, it was unlikely that the skull would be needed as evidence in any case regarding the murder anymore. Yeah, but it was still enough to put it on display without any consent of the family. Selvicke paid for the skull's transfer, and finally Rosemarie is put to rest like a real person, without any more mockery and no ifs, no buts. I announced that all the covering up of the case and embezzlement of evidence regarding Rosemarie's possible killer seems to be still going on. I did not say that for nothing. Up until today, actually right up to only a couple of weeks before I released this video, documentations of other channels belonging to public sector broadcasters reported on the death of Rosemarie Nitribitt and Harald von Bohlen und Halbach's part in it in an unreflecting way. They sweep over Harald von Bohlen und Halbach as a suspect and only reveal the information presented to the public in 1990, that he was a customer but nothing else to Rosemarie. No follow-up questions, no deeper analysis or even mentioning of the evidence I showed you pointing to Harald. A report by the Deutschlandfunk that got publicized the very day I finished the German version of this video's script disclosed how ThyssenKrupp bought favorable media coverage from different newspapers by sponsoring luxurious flights, vacations and accommodations for journalists disguised as press journeys. And of course, it worked. And now the question stands, is this non-reflective coverage of Harald von Bohlen und Halbach's possible involvement in the murder of Rosemarie Nitribitt just another coincidence? Or does it to you too fit a bit too well regarding the timing as well as the tactics of buying favorable media coverage? To put it bluntly, the broadcaster Arte released a short documentary regarding Rosemarie's case a month before I released this video. I did cover the entire documentary in a live stream, reacted and analyzed their approach on different parts, and I talked about the reporters' double standards, blatant embezzlement of information, and diversionary tactics out in the open. This stream is saved here on YouTube in a private list of mine, available to all my patrons. I know this sounds like a cash grab now, but making this video available to all now would be unfair to my patrons, as I promised this content to be available only to them. Rosemarie's story, her way, ended in the same manner it started, with a crime committed towards her by an older man that got covered up, hushed up and kept under the rug. With the criminal walking scot-free and her neither getting justice nor experiencing benevolence. If anything, she got the exact opposite of it. after a brothel owner now, of all people, had shown Rosemarie the kind of benevolence she had desperately needed, let us now be the ones who, to the best of our knowledge and belief, grant her the last bit of justice that is left after the death of all the people responsible and their accessories.